Spring 2010, the suburbs of Ivanovo. The large Nesterov family is in despair. The forest has been swallowing sounds for several hours now, and Svetlana hasn't been in touch. Early that morning, she drove out of the city to her dacha and vanished, as if the earth had swallowed her. The anxiety was growing. The premonition was, of course, a bad one. The relatives had searched all the nearby ravines. The hope that the girl was still alive didn't leave them for a moment, until one of the brothers stumbled upon a roadside dump. Peeking out from under bottles and cardboard was a woman's hand. On the nails, bright polish. It was exactly the kind of manicure Svetlana wore. There it is, this makeshift dump. Food scraps, plastic, a microwave, what isn't there? But a young woman's body? The traces of the crime were clearly meant to be hidden, covered over with whatever was at hand. What shocks is something else. From this pile of trash to the busy highway is just a stone's throw. And dozens of drivers, passing by, had no idea that a young woman was disappearing right there. Today, we're investigating a series of murders in the city of Ivanovo. Svetlana Nesterova, 32 years old. It was her body they found in the heap of garbage. Svetlana worked as an assistant judge in the Ivanovo Garrison Court, a single mother. For the weekend, she had gone to St. Petersburg and left her daughter with her parents. It was on the day of her disappearance that Svetlana was supposed to pick up the child. But the girl never waited for her mom. Svetlana Nesterova, a real estate agent, divorced, living with her 8-year-old daughter in Ivanovo. She rarely parted with the child. Friends and colleagues described her as a caring mother. The dacha was in the Bunkovo village area, presumably a criminal corpse. The investigative team reconstructed the events of that morning. Svetlana stopped by home, took a shower, and boarded a scheduled bus from Ivanovo to Yaroslavl. All the buses were checked, interviews conducted with all conductors and drivers. But it led nowhere. The main theory was that she got into someone's car, something that's common around here. The driver of one of the scheduled buses gave a statement. A young woman matching the description got off at the Afanasevo stop. From there, she needed a transfer. And that's where the girl's trail ended. Public transport in these areas runs infrequently. But that's not even the point. From the highway to the dacha house where Svetlana's daughter was waiting, it was about half an hour by bus, 10 minutes by hitchhike. Right there on these flags, the stops where people waved to catch a quicker ride. On the day Svetlana disappeared, it was pouring rain. The investigators assumed she might have stopped a passing car, too. But instead of turning toward the dacha, the driver turned into the forest. Near Svetlana's body, they found no personal belongings. No purse, no phone, no jewelry. Relatives insisted she always wore an Old Believer cross of red gold around her neck. She gave everything away, all the jewelry, earrings, chains, crosses, bracelet, rings. I think it's important. Svetlana's death was agonizing. Forensic experts determined that the girl was strangled first by hand. Bruises remained on her neck. Then with an electrical cord. A fragment of a white electrical cord was found and seized from the body, lying directly on her neck. Svetlana couldn't resist. Her hands were bound behind her back with duct tape. They deprived her of life in a very cruel way. That is, they didn't give her a chance to survive. It was a deliberate murder. Some spontaneous motives. No, the duct tape. The investigation placed a big bet on it. If the sticky tape preserved fingerprints, the evidence could identify the perpetrator. How do you lift fingerprints from a surface? Modern forensics has a dozen methods, but the most reliable is to copy them onto dactyloscopic film. With it, you can capture and transfer the unique finger pattern from the crime scene to the lab for analysis. But what if it's the opposite, a light print on a dark surface? Then they use dark film. In exceptional circumstances, when professional equipment isn't at hand, the expert will work with anything, even medical lycoplasma, for example. The fact is, the perpetrator's fingerprints were preserved on the duct tape used to bind the victim's hands. Experts examined every centimeter of the sticky tape and found papillary patterns on it. However, they faced disappointment. The perpetrator had used the duct tape like a rope. Due to the folds and creases, not a single full print could be lifted. But the killer couldn't foresee everything. He left other equally valuable clues at the scene. The following items were seized: a fragment of electrical cord, stockings, underwear, fragments of broken earrings, which were later examined for biological traces, blood, saliva, hair. Biological traces carry significant information. They're unique. In other words, at the crime scene, the killer left his genetic passport. Today, in terms of molecular genetic research, it's a sufficiently successful step forward. Today, in fact, from the tiniest amounts, like drops of blood, for example, or sweat, fatty traces, experts can isolate a genetic profile. What to do with it? Who to compare it to? The investigative team had no suspects. The case stalled. Until a year later, girls started being found again in the Ivanovo region. That day, out of the corner of his eye, a man spotted some figure in the grass by the roadside. Remote places. Probably just my imagination, thought Sergei, and drove on. On the way back, he decided to pull over anyway. He got out of the car and was horrified. Lying face down in the grass was a person, probably a girl. Her back was covered by long, tangled hair. The man called the police. The operatives combed the entire area and noticed furrows in the soil.
There were drag marks to the spot, and by the nature of the discovery, it was clear that the perpetrator had a car. The gruesome find was several kilometers from the nearest settlement. Logic suggested, unlikely the killer and his victim hiked to the quarry. The investigators had no doubt the girl was murdered. The unnatural pose and hands bound with duct tape, like Svetlana Nestorova's a year earlier, spoke to that. Psychologist-criminologists first assess the crime scene, because once they start acting, serial killers mostly repeat these actions. For them, it's a kind of ritual. Experts determined the girl's death occurred about a month earlier. All that time, the body was hidden under a layer of snow, but it had melted. The girl was strangled with an electrical cord that remained around her neck. But there was one more important detail. The lifeless victim had her throat slit with a knife. It wasn't found nearby, but based on the wound characteristics, forensic pathologists described it. A very thin blade. The cutting edge not long, just 7 centimeters. Why did the perpetrator slit the throat of an already dead girl? Duty desk of the Ivanovo region, hello. In the database of missing persons in Ivanovo, there was only one woman who matched the description and age. Marina Levchenko, 19 years old. A student at the food industry college. She had a strained relationship with her mother. After arguments, Marina often slammed the door and didn't come home overnight. Certain scandals arose in the family, and accordingly, the mother reported her missing almost a week later. About her disappearance. Once again, Marina didn't return home, and her mother thought, she's out partying. Wherever, as long as she doesn't want to come home because of the conflict with her mother. They thought she was at a friend's. The last evening of her life, Marina really spent with friends. The group was drinking and listening to music. No one noticed when the girl left the party alone.
Marina, on her last evening, was heading home along this very street, Demyana Bednoga. We know this from the testimony of her friend she was talking to on the phone. Marina casually mentioned she was passing by Skazka. There it is, Skazka, a convenience store, still operating. Then Marina turned off her phone. And what happened next can only be guessed. At midnight, it's deserted here, and there was no one for the girl to ask for help. It was clear that our future defendant knew the surroundings of Ivanovo well, and when the details of the first and second crimes matched, we understood that undoubtedly he must have had a car and meticulously planned his trips. The murders of Nestorova and Levchenko occurred in different parts of the city, separated by a whole year. Different investigative teams handled the cases, and yet, professional intuition told the investigators there was a connection between the two crimes. Neck injuries, the way her hands were positioned, the duct tape, it all pointed to a series. The results of the forensic medical examination of Marina Levchenko hadn't even come in yet when another tragedy struck in the Ivanovo suburbs. In the spring of 2011, a grandmother and grandson were picking mushrooms in the vicinity of Volzhanka village. Suddenly, they smelled smoke. They got scared. Is the native forest on fire? The brave boy resolutely peered in, like tourists who leave a fire unattended again. And sure enough, smoldering wet branches. And under them, 2 pairs of legs. Without wasting time, the mushroom pickers called the police. Yes, it was immediately clear this was murder. The bodies were badly disfigured by fire. Moreover, from the preserved exposed areas of the body, it was clear that the fire couldn't hide the cause of death. Both unfortunate women had their throats slit. Experts noted the highly unusual murder weapon. It had thin edges, and it was likely either a razor or some very thin but sharply honed object.
The same cut on the neck was on the girl found at the sand quarry, Marina, And apparently, in both cases, tire tracks from the car could be quite informative and indicative, in the sense that, preliminary, in perspective, a traceological examination could be conducted to determine, for example, the type, brand of the car on which the corresponding tracks were left. Near the bonfire, experts found car tracks. That's only in TV series that criminologists from Sweden with their scythes, hoes, and rakes. In reality, narrow specialists work on the case. The tire tread pattern is the domain of the traceologist, and in this situation, it was a very difficult task for them. After the car's tracks determine its type. The expert's verdict? It was a front-wheel drive car. By the wheel track width, most likely a VAZ 2108, 2109, 21099, and all its modifications. But was this car connected to the crime? Meanwhile, the operatives identified the victims: Elena Diomina, 21 years old, Nina Glushenko, 22 years old, cousins, unmarried. They were walking to relatives in a remote settlement. No one saw the girls after that. It was a day off. They planned to spend time with family and were following their usual route through the forest. Clearly, that's where the perpetrator caught up with them. Duty desk of the Ivanovo region. MVD, how can I help? The operatives examined every meter of the path the girls took, waiting for any lead. During the scene inspection, other items were seized, such as bottles, cigarette butts, plastic cups. Since the crime scene was essentially a household waste dump on a country road, operatives, brake marks, tire pattern, the same as on the edge of the woods. It seems that's exactly where the girls got into the car. As if the car first sharply cut off someone's path, then just as sharply sped off somewhere. Near this spot, a black woman's shoe was found. Later, relatives identified it. The murdered Nina wore such shoes. The operatives assumed that's where the girl tried to escape. And in that case, the killer left at the crime scene. The criminologists took material for analysis, and the result literally turned the investigation around. The DNA of the man who killed the sisters fully matched the sample from Marina Levchenko's case. Moreover, the same DNA belonged to the killer of Svetlana Nestorova, who was deprived of life a year earlier. All three criminal episodes were merged into one investigative case. It's terrifying. If they hadn't found this, it probably wouldn't have ended. Psychologists and criminologists were brought in to investigate the Ivanovo fiend case. They had to answer questions about the motives of the crime. What drives him? Can his behavior be predicted? There are certain myths based on our attempts as psychologists to profile a serial killer, that is, to explain his actions with motives understandable to us. A serial killer follows an internal logic, often very painful and incomprehensible to those around him. How does a maniac choose his victims? What guides him? What's his motive? Before attacking, does he stalk, or does aggression boil up spontaneously? Psychologists and criminologists compiled a profile of the serial killer from Ivanovo. Forensics in general is built, as Gleb Zheglov said to Sharapov in the famous film The Meeting Place Cannot Be Changed. The science of solving crimes is about what, somewhere, sometime, something similar has already happened. Svetlana Nestorova, 32 years old, slender blonde. Marina Levchenko, a college student, brunette with hair. Why did the killer choose exactly them as victims? It's a real puzzle. The investigators compared the circumstances of the murders, studied testimonies, looked for common threads, and noticed, in each episode, some car was mentioned. For the first time in Svetlana Nestorova's case, the mother, while searching for her daughter, noticed blue Zhigulis standing. The car is there, everything open, trunk, 2 doors, no one around, just standing on the road. Like it broke down? Nothing like that. No signs, nothing. Well, the head was elsewhere. Not far from the Skazka store, where Marina Levchenko last spoke to her friend, a road camera captured an 8. The black and white footage didn't allow determining the color. The car looked gray. In fact, we only had footage from one camera. The camera's technical setup wasn't perfect. In the sisters' case, an important witness appeared. On the day the girls died, a man saw a domestic hatchback on the country road. According to the witness, the driver was a man in sunglasses. The witness stated, "The car was approaching from the opposite direction, then suddenly turned around and drove back. The rear windows were tinted, the body color, of the same car model." But what about the color? The eyewitnesses described it differently. Let's conduct a little experiment. Now a gray circle against a pink background. It becomes slightly pinkish. Against green, it turns greenish. Some kind of trick? No, It's all optical illusion. Games our wonderful brain plays on us. We get an objective impression of color at noon in sunny weather. If only it were that simple. Example, the sea on a cloudy day is emerald, in a storm black, in sunshine blue. The investigator assumed that the witnesses were describing the same car in the same situation differently. Literally, one person says one thing, the second the diametrically opposite. It all depends on the angle, the circumstances, the state the person was in, under emotional influence. A witness can unintentionally distort facts and circumstances, but he'll be convinced of his own sincerity and truthfulness. Different people can describe the same object differently. Well, even recall such a moment if you want to experiment a bit. Remember what you ate for breakfast a week ago. I think you'll agree with me that your description of that breakfast will differ from that of your family members. The investigators couldn't rely on such contradictory testimonies. They put all the 8s and 9s in the region under surveillance. A full sample was taken. Cars of that type, Volgas and 08s and 09s, and there were over 5,000 of them. The investigators pondered. All the girls' bodies were found in forested areas. Dirt roads, sparse villages, no cell signal everywhere. Such places are called backwoods. What if tracking the perpetrator could be helped by phone billing? In essence, billing is just the points of cellular connection exits with calls. If the killer had a mobile phone on him, he was inevitably recorded by cell towers. According to forensic experts, the time frame when the murders occurred was known. It remained to outline a circle of base stations and request data on subscribers who made calls. The investigators knew they were on the right track. However, they gathered another layer of information again. It turned out that at the time the crimes were committed, several thousand people were using phones. Every one could be a suspect. By all means, they needed to narrow the search circle. What drew the killer to these areas? The investigators studied the map. Here's the spot where Marina Levchenko was found, by the road leading to the sand quarry. The mined sand is hauled to the asphalt plant. Coincidence or not? The place where Nestorova was found was a branch of the same asphalt plant. A hunch arose. What if an employee of this enterprise was involved in the brutal crimes? They took genetic material from them for testing. They checked routes and vehicle logs. But in fact, it was established that the route they drove, spring thaw, well, unlikely their transport would take them there. More likely, it was some light car that drove in. The operatives patrolling the Zhiguli, the car turned off the highway toward the sand quarry, stopped at the roadside, in exactly the spot where a chance witness found the murdered girl. The operatives watched. What happens next? Maybe hiding another murdered girl? Law enforcement decided to detain them red-handed. As it turned out, teenagers, just collecting scrap metal at the dump. Dubious earnings, but nothing criminal. This false lead undoubtedly distracted a lot of effort and resources, a lot of time checking these guys, who were unlucky enough to have very similar cars or other. Did the perpetrator have ties to industrial production? The main clue in the case was the murder weapon. Svetlana and Marina Levchenko were strangled with an electrical cord. But not a simple one. This was a specific power cable. It's not used in household needs. It carries industrial frequency currents. As for the short blade, the description fully matches a utility knife, an indispensable tool in the arsenal of an electrician or installer. The investigation was learning more and more about the perpetrator. He navigates the forest south of Ivanovo well, knows electrical work, drives an 8. In addition, specialists compiled his psychological profile. The killer is clearly capable of suppressing someone else's will. This is a person with an inferiority complex, far from the life of the party. Yes, he can't fit into society. He lacks that recognition, that sense of control, power, and accordingly, not successful with the opposite sex. That's why he doesn't accept. The investigators also had the killer's DNA from his blood and saliva. But how to find a person by these parameters? The Ivanovo killer already had 4 lives on his account. What if he doesn't stop? The investigative team decided to use all methods to prevent new crimes. Rumors were multiplying that law enforcement was powerless. And then, a decision was made to approach the governor with a proposal to announce a reward for significant information about the perpetrator's identity. The regional head helps the investigation. All print and electronic media, regional and Moscow, joined in. Duty desk of the Ivanovo region MVD, operative speaking. An avalanche of calls flooded the duty desk. There were plenty of people eager for the coveted sum. The father of one of the murdered girls turned to a popular TV show. Specialists in so-called applied psychology. The Magi peered intently at the photos of the murdered Ivanovo women for a very long time. Even such versions, professionals in search work are obliged to check. The version turned out to be a fake. The psychics didn't bother themselves, just took photos from some website. Two of these brutal men turned out to be career VDV officers, and at the time of the murders, wasted precious time and manpower. But professionals didn't give up. The investigation had an important clue: the perpetrator's DNA. But what to compare it with? Operatives took biomaterial samples from all suspects in the case, as well as previously convicted for similar crimes, owners of domestic cars, individuals registered in psychiatric dispensaries. Over several years of investigation, the database accumulated over 11,000 people who had come into our field of vision. DNA was taken from all of them. This is about 16,000 DNAs. Everything was collected and provided to the Investigative Committee for Genetic Research. The Ivanovo region continued to live in fear. The rapist-murderer was still at large and thirsted for new blood. The same mechanism starts working, roughly similar to forming a drug addiction. By the way, Alexander Bukhanovsky wrote about this, the first psychiatrist who began working with serial killers. Yes, those who profiled Chikatilo. Later, he wrote that murder causes addiction no worse than narcotic.
Meanwhile, since the double murder in Voltsanka village, not a single similar case had been recorded. The investigation wondered, could the perpetrator have moved to another region? In such a situation, the version that the citizen or suspect left the region, it's quite common for us. Despite everything, the investigators didn't despair. DNA tests. Artem Sosnovic and his team selected 100 of the most likely suspects and sent their samples for re-examination. And in 2018, in November, so to speak, it hit the mark. We received information about a DNA profile match. Kodunkov, married, father of many children. Until 2010, he was a day laborer on construction sites. In his free time, he did private cab driving. The medical examination pointed to a person who externally raised no suspicions. His biological material was taken 7 years ago as the owner of a 3-door Zhiguli. Valery Kodunkov, born 1979, a guy from the people, a hard-working painter, settings, an exemplary family man, citizenship, education, secondary, has 3 minors, all. Even in the moments of interrogation, Kodunkov was calm. But he couldn't help understanding what awaited him for 4 ruined lives, the highest measure. And in modern Russia, that's life imprisonment. At first, Kodunkov flatly denied everything, feigning displeasure. I was driving to this girl. She got in my car and told me where to go. The painter from Ivanovo played innocent, so a big stage was crying out for him. However, he'd long been used to living a double life. Acquaintances spoke of him. Tough, but from what everyone said about him, colleagues and friends, ready to cover for anyone, take on any job. The bosses appreciated the investigator's work, compares it to a game of chess. To win, you need to think several moves ahead, catch the nuances of the criminal's facial expressions and intonations. The psychological duel lasted hours, but in the end, the investigator managed to catch the opponent in contradictions. His defense collapsed. As a rule, they don't cooperate with the investigation at that stage, as long as there's even a small chance to jump off. When it becomes clear that it's all over, they start telling in great detail, even bragging in some cases about what they've done. Kodunkov confessed. All these years, he felt like a cornered beast. The investigation was on his heels. It turned out the DNA sample from him had been taken more than once, into the circle of suspects. Kodunkov was mistakenly. Witnesses spoke of blue lighting. The time it happened, respectively, if it was dusk, there's an expression, between wolf and dog, when objects start to merge, and so on. That is, there are plenty of factors that influence a person's perception of this or that reality, this or that object, distorting factors. From that day, his punishment began, an endless fear of being caught, exposed. Fearing that witnesses had seen his car, Kodunkov sold it. Then he got a job on rotation, afraid that if he stayed in Ivanovo, they'd come for him for sure. Well, he always hid everything, his face, that whole mask, cap, so that no eyes, nothing was visible. He never apologized to anyone once. But he didn't admit guilt. Kodunkov knew prison life firsthand. He had been convicted multiple times for robbery and violence. The first time, after the abuse, Kodunkov let the victim go. The girl went to the police, and the criminal was detained. Kodunkov drew a terrible conclusion. No more witnesses. Released from prison again, he settled down, started a family. The painter's salary wasn't enough for life, so in his free time, the father of many drove a cab. When an antique cross gleamed on the chest of another passenger, greed took over, and the driver turned into the forest, demanded valuables, dumped out the bag, saw the ID of an assistant to the garrison military court, and got scared. The victim began telling him that they'd find him anyway, that she worked in the court, and accordingly, the criminal decided to kill her. The next day, the recidivist was doing a general cleanup in the cabin, afraid that blood and the murdered woman's hair remained on the seat. That's why all the doors were open on the car when the distraught mother of Svetlana Nestorova drove by. When this car that was standing there, it immediately clicked. Imagine, 10 years passed. When they finally found him, everything came out. Which one to steal? There was nothing. Like the first victim, he strangled Marina with a power cord. He always carried it with him. And what cord? Can't say exactly now. Electrical cord. And where did you get it? Wiring from the car. Well, it was lying in the car, the wiring. Panic. He pulled his favorite tool from the trunk, a utility knife, and finished what he started. And where'd you get the knife? From the car. That is, you walked to the car and came back? Yes. And in these shots, the Ivanovo fiend assures, before dealing with the sisters Lena and Nina, he was extremely polite with them. Didn't even raise his voice. Did you threaten or something? No, I didn't threaten. Even no. Told them to get out of the car. The area where the two innocent girls met their tragic end, the perpetrator knew like the back of his hand. He spent almost every weekend in these forests, came to fish, and at the same time studied access routes. Forcing the sisters into the car, he chose the bumpiest road that everyone avoids. I generally drove to fish in this area, to all these lakes, and we couldn't always pass even in dry weather. However, the perpetrator miscalculated. A local resident was coming the opposite way, who became one of the main prosecution witnesses. Another proof of Kodenkov's involvement in the crimes was phone billing. Cell base stations recorded his location. Moreover, it turned out, every time Kodenkov set out on his bloody hunt, his wife called him. In a mundane voice, the maniac replied, "I'm at work. Everything's fine. I'll be back for dinner." And the caring wife suspected nothing, doesn't drink, takes care of the kids. In my experience, it's exactly these people who are capable of such crimes, the ones who don't stand out at all. And the car itself was such an unremarkable 2108. All this, including, allowed him to stay at large for so long, probably uncaptured. Not noticeable, attractive. It can't be her. Valerie, a loving husband and father of 3, isn't capable of such atrocities. The woman confirmed her husband did carry a gasoline canister in the trunk, but who doesn't? And wires with tools were always with him. After all, Valerie had golden hands. Unclear, of course, how a person has 3 children. Yes, hard to call him human, depriving another child of a mother. At the trial, Kodenkov insisted he didn't want to kill. The motive was thirst for profit. And he robbed passengers because he wanted to bring a penny home, like needed to feed the family. The kids were small. Small less. Already realizing he couldn't escape the highest measure, the thrifty Kodenkov argued, what material damage did he cause the victims? That very red gold cross belonging to Svetlana Nestorova wasn't worth a dime. The mothers of the murdered girls didn't quibble. They refused to demand material compensation. You can't bring back daughters. All the women wanted was to punish the guilty as severely as the law allows. And so it happened. The serial killer from Ivanovo received a life sentence. This is the project Hunt for the Maniac.